It's time for another episode of Writer's Block. And today we welcome back Gary Thomas, our regular, and Stephan Byrne, our guest star for today. And for episode's title is Story Part 1, we'll be discussing structure and how script writers find their story. Anyway, let's get on with the show. I think it's time to meet our guests. Gary, how was the Talent Campus coming along?
Yeah, it was really good. So this year we've had the London Screenwriters Festival Talent Campus, which I applied for kind of a last minute application because I wasn't going to do it, and then I wanted to because it was too good an opportunity to miss. And I applied and I was selected, which is really great. So what you get with that is since the festival, we get extra mentoring as well. So hopefully there's another pitching day in December where our projects, if we get the right people to pitch to, we'll be able to pitch some more to some more executives, which will be really good. And I'm kind of writing a 4-page treatment at the moment for that, and we're getting mentored on that as well. So it's really good.
So how much more time is there left of the whole Talent Campus?
So it goes on till December, so we're about halfway through now. And hopefully with my script, I should have a finished script by March, unless an executive is interested and wants to see it, in which case I have to be much quicker.
Well, thanks very much, and good luck with the rest. Stephan, I hear you've just come back from the Austin Film Festival.
Yeah, the Austin Film Festival I decided to do as an alternative this year, instead of going to the London Screenwriters Festival, and it was a great decision. Austin is a great city anyway, but the Austin Film Festival, which includes a screenwriters conference, was an amazing event. So many great speakers, wonderful people met there, and then on top of that you've got a film festival as well. So there's short films, a filmmakers track throughout the conference, feature films. It's very all inclusive, and there's a great atmosphere and a great buzz in Austin, and throughout the entire weekend.
What was your highlight of the whole festival?
Highlight was really hearing Shane Black speak was quite frequently. Was really lovely. He was such a nice guy, so informative and positive and really encouraging to everyone. Gave fantastic advice. In fact, the advice throughout all the different tracks, the different sessions and seminars, was really, really high caliber. That was probably my main features. But of course, you can't get away from the fact that it's going to be based around people, and meeting all those amazing people, filmmakers, screenwriters of all different calibers and levels, is always going to be a highlight.
Okay, well, thanks very much, and welcome back to the UK and our beautiful weather. Anyway, now let's get on with the rest of the show. In every episode, I get the guests to choose a script related to the topic we're talking about within the episode. Gary, do you want to tell us what your script is?
Yeah, my script this time around is The Proposal.
Okay, do you think, because today's episode is about structure and finding how the scriptwriters find the story, do you want to tell us a bit about the structure?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting structure. What I realised, I was watching it yesterday actually. I was watching Legally Blonde and The Proposal. So in The Proposal, you've got Sandra Bullock, who's very successful at her job, her publishers, but she's emotionally unavailable, so she can't get attached to anyone. So the whole story is about how she learns to kind of find someone, and she falls in love with her assistant. So she's Canadian. She can't stay in the country because her visa's been rejected. So they're going to be deported and then she thinks, there's a light bulb moment that she has about 10 minutes in, where she decides Andrew could marry her, and that way she'll be able to stay in the country. And she basically blackmails Andrew, or forces Andrew to marry her and go along with it. And then they're at the immigration office and they find out she finds out for the first time that his parents, and he grew up in Alaska, and so that's where they end up going for the whole weekend. And actually, interestingly, most of the movie is actually in Alaska. So it starts with her job, and then within 20 minutes, they're in Alaska. They're with her parents, with his family, and so when all the kind of trouble ensues, and she's kind of doesn't want to get close to anyone, but all these people are being really nice. So yeah, it's really interesting to look at it in that way.
So it did well at ticking the boxes, and as far
Yeah.
as like when certain things happen along for, like, for example, the plot twist happens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and actually, it's what's happening at the moment now. Like the first, you'd call it the 30-page mark. Now it's kind of like, 20 minutes was the kind of act one, as like basically 22 minutes. And again, Legally Blonde, it's about the same. It's about 20 minutes. So yeah, so they're off to Alaska, and then an hour in, actually, I don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen it, but an hour in, the parents kind of suggest that they get married there that weekend. So that's another thing that they got to deal with, and actually kind of they do go with it, but I won't spoil the exact ending. But yeah, it's a really interesting one to look at.
Okay, well, thanks very much. I think you gave a good sense of what the structure was. Stephan, what's your script for today?
My script is one of my favourite films. It's Brick. Brick is a modern classic noir. It doesn't try to subvert the genre at all. It really much sticks entirely to the conventions of the noir genre. You've got your detective who gets increasingly less well and more beaten up as the story progresses. You have your femme fatale. The mystery unfolds, and we learn at the same time as the protagonist what happens. It was Rian Johnson's first script. And the way he wrote it was also interesting because he didn't really have screenwriting software or anything. So rather than write it out several times with all the edits on his typewriter, he wrote it as a novella first, trying to stay true as possible to the tropes and themes established by writers like Raymond Chandler. And then once he'd written his novella and was happy with it, then he turned it into a script. And the script was very well adhered to towards the end. There were very few changes. I think there was a couple of changes depending on what side of the road the lamppost was on, so they had to film it slightly differently. But other than that, it was very much true to the original screenplay. Structurally, like I said, it adheres very well to the noir tropes. You've got your build-up, the mystery is established very quickly, and then the clues start to unfold one after the other. And towards the end, obviously, you've got the final twist at the end. Obviously, not going to reveal it. It is a mystery and definitely worth watching. And Gary hasn't seen it yet, so I'm looking forward to his reaction. But it's very tightly structured, very tightly scripted. There's very little waste to it. It's very, very tight. Everything you see is important. Everything you don't see it for a reason. And the reason is it's irrelevant to the story.
Well, thanks very much for breaking down the films as far as structure goes, and let's move on to the first topic. Our first topic is how scriptwriters find their stories. So, Gary, do you want to tell us how you typically find your story?
Yeah, typically is an interesting word. In my short film I made, Dog in the Palace, I dreamt that entirely in split screen, and I woke up and thought, wow, I want to do that, and that's what I did. So a few stories I've had as dreams. I've had a dream that was definitely a novel, and I haven't actually done anything with that yet, but that was kind of interesting because when I was dreaming it, I could feel myself thinking this is definitely a novel, it's not a film. That's kind of weird, but that was like a really interesting dream actually. And a lot of the time it's just about asking what if. I think what if this happened, and what if that happened, what if this happened and nothing happened, and then so stuff like that. I was in Edinburgh. We went to the Edinburgh Festival this year, and I was just sitting on a bench, and I was wondering just if I saw a couple propose and some homeless guy was sitting on the bench and watching it, and she invited him to the wedding, and how would that play out? And that was kind of just from sitting in a park, I kind of maybe thought of myself as a homeless guy. I don't know why, but that was a bit weird. But then I kind of think about that for a minute and think, is that different enough from I Love You Man or something? Has it been done before? What can I do differently? And generally, if it stays in my head, then I kind of want to think more about it and start writing, the actual outline.
Okay. Stefan, how do you...
What if is pretty much the same kind of idea. I mean, I don't have Gary's lucid dreaming benefit, but what if is generally how I look at the world. I mean, it's generally been said that very often I end up regardless of whether it's a different genre or a different theme, at the end of the day, there's always what I end up writing is a what if. What if the world is not quite as we appear? Things where we might walk through the world and go, oh, well, that's a bit odd, and then never think of it again. The question is, why is it a bit odd? What if there was something darker behind it? What if there was something weirder behind it? The idea of, is there something weirder behind it is always awesome. Because sometimes the amount of times people have said, oh, you couldn't make that up. Actually, I disagree with that entirely. Truth is not always stranger than fiction. There's always something a little stranger. There's always something that could be different. The person who looks a little odd, what if there's a reason for it? The thing that's out of place, the deja vu feeling, as was used in the Matrix as an idea as well. The idea of that something could always be slightly different. There's something beneath the thin veneer of what we call reality, that comfort blanket that we love to wrap ourselves in to rest ourselves assured that the world is not quite so terrifying. I quite like the idea that the world could be quite so terrifying. Even if it's not a supernatural or weirdness thing, the person that you think is looking at you funny as you're walking down the street could be because of a problem with he thinks he's a hitman, and he's confused you with his next target. Anything could come out of everything. It's a matter of really just walking through the world with open eyes.
And find things trigger other things as well. Like you see something and then that triggers, oh, hang on, how did that happen? Why did that happen?
And then things start linking together. Most storytellers, and regardless of what medium, tend to read and or watch voraciously. So you start linking things through. Well, there was this article I read about homelessness. There was this this anecdote that someone once told me. There was this absolutely vile person I overheard on a bus. Suddenly you're linking things through, and you start to realize there's a flow here. And things get rejected, things get put in, things get slightly adapted. No anecdote can't be improved.
At some point it kind of comes down to who is this person watching this, or who is this person seeing it, and then I think that's where I kind of stop with a story and I think about who this character might be, who's who's the main character in this story, I think.
What's their goal? What are they trying to achieve out of this?
What do you generally do when you've come up with that sort of brain flash sort of moment? Do you always have some note cards with you, or do you jot it down on your phone? So what do you generally do to try and do obviously make sure you remember the story and then obviously start expanding essentially?
Yes, both. Almost always have index cards, pens, notepad of some kind with me. The times when you don't, well, anybody who knows me knows I'm pretty much never more than about 1 millimeter away from my phone at any one time. And that's where a lot of ideas just go in, just sticking it into a draft, just an idea, store it away, stick it into Dropbox or Evernote, and then sometime later come back to it and sift through and go, oh, okay. All right, okay. And sometimes it's through searches. You store loads of text files or put things into Evernote, and you just go, I wonder just on this idea, stick the word in, and suddenly all these thoughts pop up that you've had over the last period of time. And you start going, okay, these are the pieces. These can fit. This doesn't. This does. But I mean, almost everybody has something to take notes with them at all times, even if it's just a phone. But a phone is really easy, especially if it's just a quick thought. You overhear a snippet of conversation. The amount of times where an idea has gelled from hearing or mishearing, even better, someone else's conversation, where you think, actually, that little anecdote, if it was just a little bit different, that would be a really good story. Even characters.
Gary, what do you usually do?
I mean, I've been living dangerously, I guess. I don't always write things down if I think of them, but I think that's also a tactic to see how interested I am in it. I like to think that I would remember it if I was really interested, and then maybe I think, I definitely want to write this down. So it's almost like, what do I think of this idea? It's like subconsciously, I guess that's my filter. of different ideas.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely I'm writing things on my phone. What I get then is a lot of different documents, which is always kind of confusing, and you have to name them like ideas 1 or ideas 300 or whatever. So yeah, so that's kind of a bit, yeah, managing all of that is kind of awkward. But yeah, I generally will write something on my phone if I really like it. If I've thought about it for a couple of days, then yeah, I'll write it down.
Yeah.
And these days, of course, all the different apps and things all sync with
Yeah.
each other, so you
Yeah.
can have things back at home,
Yeah.
either via Dropbox, Evernote.
Evernote is really good for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've got Evernote on my phone.
Yeah, you
iPad,
sent me stuff.
laptop.
Yeah.
Well, no, can you have it on laptop? But
Yeah,
yes,
you can.
yes,
Yeah, it's the web. Yeah, well,
So, yeah.
you've shared photos with me on Evernote and stuff like that, and ideas and things. So yeah, it's really useful.
Which can also then be useful for collaborating. If you were
Yeah.
co-writing a script, you can have a shared folder, different ideas come together. But yeah, in effect,
Yeah,
everybody will always have something.
yeah,
Yeah. I think what you were saying about even though if you don't jot down the idea, that can be a test of whether it's a good idea.
yeah.
And that was also going to be my next question, is like, how do you judge whether an idea is worth pursuing, basically?
I suppose it's even when I do write them down, I think things get further down that list of things that I kind of want to work on next. Like, I mean, I'm writing 3 scripts at the moment, which is kind of probably the definition of madness when you're writing too many projects at the same time. But yeah, so like one of them is someone is kind of waiting for it, so that's kind of trying to be my first one. But then I've got 2 mentors, so now it's kind of somebody's waiting for each of them, so that's kind of awkward. But at the same time, it does give me that deadline to say this is what I need to do on this treatment, and by this date I need to send it to someone. So that's kind of really useful. And with that, I've kind of chosen the projects that I really have been working on for a while because I really want them to, be in the best position they can be. And then yeah, with newer ideas, they just kind of go I guess further down the list or up the list. I've written 2 pages of a kind of TV idea that I had because I really liked that one, and that was quite a kind of personal story. So I knew, I wanted something that I could write that was kind of honest. It was about me, but not autobiographical, in a way. So that was kind of interesting. So that one I wrote kind of 2 pages out, and I think that's the one I kind of want to start thinking about next. But yeah, it's about writing them down and then looking at them a month or so after and saying, do I still like that idea?
Stephan?
Well, I often don't have initially fully formed ideas. It's little snippets. So it's very much like a kind of alchemy where you're gaining ingredients over time, and at some point something just catalyzes, and when the imagination won't let it go, when it literally just has to come out, then that's the one. And it could be anything that triggers it, anything that brings those last elements together. And sort of at that point, you've just, whether you then turn it into a treatment or an outline, or you just sit in front of fade in or final draft and start hammering it out, and then coming back out and going back and doing the outline.
Well, thanks very much for all your input. Now let's move on to the next section. For this episode, I'm going to be challenging for guests to come up with a one-liner for a film of my choosing, and you at home will get to treat me with which one you prefer. So for one-liner for film you have to come up with is Back to the Future. So you've got 1 minute. If you start getting ready, I'm going to count you down from now. Okay, time's up. So Gary, do you want to go first and come up with a one-liner?
Cheat.
Okay, Martin McFly must travel back in time to save his own family. With the help of Doc Brown, he has to get back to 1985.
This is very good, well done. And Stephan?
My logline is: a young man must travel back in time, avoid incest with his mother, and make sure his parents get together.
So you're going for the comedic approach then. So anyway, now it's time for you, for audience at home, to start treating me with which one you prefer. Anyway, now let's move on to the second topic. Our second topic is structure. So, Gary, do you use the Sid Field structure, or is that mandatory to use that structure, or?
Not really, but I think it's basically Sid Field is like the classic 3-act structure. So I think it's kind of there in all movies, whether the filmmakers or writers kind of like it or not. It all comes down to the timings and what the audience expects. I kind of really like the Blake Snyder beat sheet method, so that's the one that I use most often. But at the end of the day, when you delete all the kind of titles, he has different titles for each section, so there's like 15 sections. But when you kind of delete those titles, then you just end up with one document that tells the story, hopefully in a really good and entertaining way, and it hits the beats that kind of people expect, I guess. And I think if you can find a really interesting way of doing it where it's not so obvious, then that's obviously really good and that will interest people. But I think like something for a spec script, it's kind of a good idea to follow that, unless you kind of know them really well and you can subvert them in a really good way.
As a U writer, do you have to keep within those kind of paradigms?
I think, yeah, again, it's a new writer doesn't necessarily mean like first script. There could be a new writer on their fourth script. So I think that would be kind of an interesting way to kind of, interesting idea to then see if you can subvert stories in an interesting way, which might be worth doing. So.
But if you're the person in charge of deciding whether to take the script forwards, especially for the first 10 pages, they look for specific things. For example, like even the first page, whether you get a good sense of what the story's going to be, and then obviously like 10 pages in, and then they kind of look at specific marks. And I know you hear stories that because obviously they've got hundreds of scripts to go through, they obviously skip to certain parts, basically. So
I think generally the first 10 pages is a good idea, to make your script readable throughout anyway, and to make it really good and as best as it can be, make it really awesome. And then you've got like the first 10 pages, which is generally a cut-off point for a lot of readers. They will kind of read the first 10 pages so they don't think it's going anywhere. Or if it's a story they've seen 100 times before, then they won't read on. So the first 10 pages has to really kind of set up character, set up the world, set up the conflict, and all that, and then this kind of story starts going. So like I was mentioning, the proposal, so like within the first 10 minutes they're getting married and he really doesn't want to get married, and so that's kind of interesting, and obviously it's a kind of immediate conflict. You can see that's going to be like a good story to follow. There's always going to be conflict in that story.
So Stephan, I've heard that you've had some good sort of sessions on structure at the Austin Film Festival. Do you want to?
Absolutely. For example, the first thing, your classic 3-act structure, as first thought of by Sid Field or Aristotle, or pretty much any normal human narrative. As humans, we're story-driven creatures. Everything has a bit of a narrative. It doesn't matter whether it's a dirty joke, a limerick, a sketch. There's going to be a build-up. There's going to be stuff happening. There's going to be a climax, and then you've got a wind down. It's not specific to screenwriting. It's specific to how we like to address story, even if there's a subversion like Memento. But even then, if you break it apart, it still does the same thing. You've still got the beginning, you've still got the middle, you've still got the end. Or depending if you read a different book, there's a 5-act structure, or perhaps you like the 7-act structure. I've seen an 8-segment structure: the hero's journey, the save the cat. I'm sure someone's writing yet another different structure, another different theory, yet another way of selling the idea that you must learn structure to fledgling screenwriters, there's a great industry in it. But very often some of those detailed elements of structure are great for criticizing scripts or films after the fact. If they are a crutch during the writing of it, they can be a case of the tail wagging the dog.
Okay, so what section would you say you find the hardest to write? So I suppose beginning, obviously, is pretty important because you essentially have to suck the audience in. So is there a lot of pressure with that? So do you find that very intimidating, or so what structure?
Kind of. I mean, I kind of like the whole setup. What I find in developing my own scripts is that I'll maybe even do a draft and think this is the kind of page 30 moment or the page 24 moment is actually the page 10 moment. So I have to delete like the whole of first act or something like that, and obviously that's better in the treatment or the outline that you can make those decisions work rather than actually doing it in the script. But yeah, I think for me it's kind of like Act 2 because you have like 60 pages and you have to keep people interested. You have to keep the reader reading. You have to keep the audience interested. You have to make them laugh if it's a comedy. You have to come up with all of these jokes. And it just feels like such a kind of... feels like an hour long script, you know, that's kind of... And then you have the acts either side. But yeah, Act 2 is kind of really interesting. And I've seen like even there's books on... purely on Act 2, you know, those 60 pages, how you fill those 60 pages. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, that's always kind of been slightly traumatic for me in the writing process.
I think, Jenny, I think you've done more sort of feature film writing than TV.
Yeah.
I mean, from the sort of experience you've had and also the experience you've had, I mean, how different does the structure of TV change? Because I suppose you've got... especially with TV, you've got to follow like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, 4, 5 because of adverts. So
it depends, obviously. I mean, there are people much better qualified to answer, but of course, each channel and where in the watershed and what country it's in will have a different structure of where that is. You know, an HBO is going to have a very different structure to ITV, sadly. I think part of the structural element is with a screenplay, you start off with your protagonist having a view of the world, a wrong view of the world as far as the theme of the film is concerned, and by the end he needs to shift. So, for example, in Finding Nemo, Nemo's dad has to start with the right thing to do, the right way to live my life is protect my son from any danger at all costs. I will not let go. I will not relinquish control. And throughout the film, the whole point is to slowly show him it's okay to let go. And only at the end is that then closed off by going, okay, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to let go a little bit. You can't quite close that off in TV because otherwise it would be very short. You'd be like, okay, well, I've got to start a new loop, a new cycle. You can't quite bring that full conclusion to the end. You've got to keep cycling around, potentially in a new direction.
Do you find structure more of a hindrance, or do you actually find that it actually helps you as far as like, especially when you're stuck with ideas, it kind of, you know, you've got to hit certain points by a certain page. So so do you find it hindrance or a help?
Yeah, I think I know enough now, I think, to not worry about the page numbers. So I kind of know, you know, that something needs to happen by this point or whatever in the page count. But I think for me, it's just a nice, it can trigger things. It can trigger, like if I go back and read about structure, then it can trigger thoughts and what could happen if. And again, that what if question, that I know this needs to happen or something like this should happen. And normally the first couple ideas are the most obvious, and then I'll try and think of some more ideas and come up with like the really funny or the really good idea or scene idea that does that, you know. So yeah.
Okay, and Stephan?
I think the idea of structure and the theory of structure obviously is not a hindrance because all narrative does have a structure, but I would find a rigid adherence to a page count limiting. Especially in the initial drafts, where it's just a matter of getting the story out and getting it polished and getting it good.
Well, thanks very much for all those fantastic points. So now we're going to go on to the next section where we're going to be doing another challenge where I'm going to be testing for guests on their 25-word synopsis. And it's going to be another film, not Back to the Future this time. So anyways, see you in a bit. It's time now for the second challenge of the episode. and I'm going to be challenging my guests to come up with a 25-word synopsis for the film Alien. So both of you, you've got 2 minutes to come up with a 25-word synopsis, starting in 3, 2, 1, go. No cheating, Gary. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, Gary, do you want to start off with yours then?
First, because I'm finished, I think. I don't know how good this is. A woman must protect her crew and ship from an alien without knowing it's actually growing inside her.
Sounds scary. Stephan?
The crew of a space vessel discover an alien nest and unwittingly bring the horror back amongst them, which takes them out one by one.
Anyway, I thought both of them were very good. And it's now time for you, for audience, to decide which 25-word synopsis was better. And it's time to say goodbye. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.